A crumpled man. Samuel drifted into the courtroom, a tattered leaf caught in an ill wind. His ill-fitting clothes, several sizes too big, draped off him like a shroud, the cloth threadbare at the elbows and cuffs. Each step, labored and evident, saw his boots, scuffed and unlaced, whisper against the polished floor. His gaze clung to the ground as if answers lay etched between the marble veins. The air itself felt viscous, pregnant with expectation and judgment. A stark contrast as he was, a wilted figure amidst a crisp landscape of tailored suits and starched collars. Lawyers murmured in low tones, their glances sharp. Court reporters' fingers danced across their stenotype keys. The gallery buzzed with faces, a mosaic of morbid curiosity and veiled fascination, all seemingly anchored, confident. Samuel felt transparency encroaching, as if he were dissolving into the room's hum. A sharp, impatient rap of a gavel echoed from the bench, snapping him to attention. He recoiled slightly, his shoulders rising further. He hadn't even registered his pause. A bored-looking officer gestured him toward the defendant's table. Samuel obeyed, his movements measured like a puppet with tangled strings. He lowered himself into the worn chair, the aged wood protesting beneath his weight. The table's polished facade reflected a ghostly version of himself, a hollowed face framed by chaos of graying hair, eyes burdened by untold stories and a profound, lingering fatigue. He averted his gaze, unable to meet it. A ripple of whispers traveled through the onlookers. He felt their eyes upon him, dissecting, scrutinizing. He imagined their conclusions: a derelict, a castaway, a disgrace. The word veteran felt like a twisted barb, an injustice. What could they comprehend of the sacrifices given, the nightmares endured, the demons wrestled daily? He gripped the table's edge, knuckles bone-white. Focus. He had to hold on to Ms. Rodriguez's words. Just answer the questions, Mr. Johnson. Tell the truth. Simple advice, yet a crushing weight. He chanced to glance at Ms. Rodriguez, a tranquil center in the escalating storm. Her dark eyes connected with his, offering a small reassurance. He gave a barely perceptible nod, a silent attempt at a promise. The bailiff cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the hushed room. All rise, he intoned, his voice resonant. Everyone complied. Samuel hesitated, his joints protesting with age. He pushed himself upright, flinching almost imperceptibly. The heavy oak doors behind the judge's dais swung inward, and Judge Thompson strode in, black robes billowing in his wake. He was an imposing figure, his expression stern, unyielding. He settled into his seat, his gaze sweeping across the room, pausing briefly on Samuel. "Be seated," the judge declared, his voice authoritative. As the assembly settled back, the court clerk began reading from a document, the language dense and arcane. Samuel struggled to concentrate, his mind a chaotic landscape of fragmented memories and anxieties. And then he heard it. Samuel T. Johnson. The clerk's voice, clear and distinct, cut through the fog. He looked up, startled. He was the focal point. He swallowed, his mouth dry. A tremor coursed through him. This was it. The trial was underway. An unbearable weight crashed upon his spine, bowing him further. He was isolated, a broken man facing a system that threatened to erase him. Yet, deep within the layers of exhaustion and despair, a spark of resistance ignited. He would not be muted. He would articulate his story, whether it was believed or not. He owed it to himself, to his comrades, to the memory of the man he once was. The price of bread. The courtroom's fluorescent buzz grated on Samuel's nerves, a harsh contrast to the inner turmoil swirling within him. His tweed jacket, usually a solace, now felt like a leaden weight, a cruel reminder of sunnier times. The hard wooden bench offered no comfort to his weary frame as he shifted uncomfortably. The American flag, hanging listlessly in the corner, felt like a garish affront. Across the aisle, a young woman with a hawkish gaze adjusted her spectacles. Ambition glittered in her eyes. Ms. Albright, the prosecutor, Samuel knew the name intimately. It had become synonymous with his looming downfall. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice a precise blade cutting through the courtroom's low hum, "you stand accused of petty theft. The unlawful acquisition of a sourdough loaf from Mrs. Higgins' bakery on October 27th. A wave of whispers washed over the gallery. Bread. The very notion stung. A flush crawled up Samuel's neck. He could almost taste the judgment, the silent condemnation of a man brought so low. Ms. Albright pressed on, her voice rising slightly to overcome the murmuring. "The Crown will demonstrate that Mr. Johnson entered Mrs. Higgins' establishment at approximately 7:15 a.m. Surveillance footage, to be presented as Exhibit A, clearly depicts the defendant selecting the aforementioned loaf from the display. He then, without rendering payment, absconded from the premises." A theatrical pause. Mrs. Higgins herself witnessed this larceny and promptly alerted the authorities. The bread, valued at a paltry $4.50, was subsequently recovered a block from the bakery in Mr. Johnson's possession. Samuel's public defender, Mr. Davies, leaned close. "Remember the plan, Samuel. Keep your composure. Let me take the lead." His words, intended to soothe, only deepened Samuel's apprehension. Davies seemed overwhelmed, his suit creased, his eyes holding a world-weary resignation. Ms. Albright summoned her first witness, Mrs. Higgins. A stout woman, her hair pulled back in a severe knot, her face etched with disapproval, took the stand. She swore to tell the truth, her voice trembling slightly. "Mrs. Higgins," Ms. Albright began gently, "could you recount the events of October 27th for the court?" Mrs. Higgins cleared her throat. "Well, it was a Tuesday market day, and I was preparing the display. I observed him enter, this individual." She shot Samuel a glance, her eyes a mix of pity and accusation. "He went directly for the sourdough. My signature bake, you know. Takes 3 days to proof it right." Her voice wobbled with indignation. "He simply snatched it and walked out. Didn't even glance at the other selections. No attempt to pay. It's not about the money. It's the principle. It's theft." Ms. Albright nodded with practiced sympathy. "And you are certain the defendant is the person who took the loaf?" Mrs. Higgins pointed a shaky finger at Samuel. "Beyond a doubt. I'll never forget his face. The look in his eyes, desperate. But that's no excuse for pilfering." Samuel stared at his hands, rough and weathered by a lifetime of honest labor. He recalled the hollow ache in his stomach, the overwhelming urge to quell the hunger gnawing at him. He hadn't intended to steal. It was a moment of weakness, a yielding to despair. He squeezed his eyes shut, the image of the golden sourdough, its crust crackling with promise, burned behind his eyelids. The aroma of baking, a fleeting comfort in his bleak existence. The courtroom air hung thick with condemnation. He was a miscreant, a criminal, all for a humble loaf. A glimmer of hope. Sarah observed him through the reinforced glass. Samuel T. Johnson. The case file sketched a bleak portrait, vagrancy, resisting, disturbing the peace. Yet, the documents failed to capture the man's slumped posture, the defeated set of his shoulders, his stare riveted to a spot on the floor only he could see. Absent was the deep-seated exhaustion carved into the wrinkles bracketing his eyes, the subtle tremor that animated his hands clutching a paper cup. He radiated hopelessness. The firm's other lawyers had already written him off. Another lost soul, they'd declared. Just a number. Plead him out, cut losses. But something in Sarah chafed at their callousness. Beyond the dirt and rumpled clothing, past the slurred accusations and the sterile police report, she detected a spark, a fragile ember of humanity flickering beneath layers of despair. The door to the holding cell clanged open at her touch, the metallic echo jarring Samuel. He remained motionless. "Mr. Johnson," her voice, gentle yet resolute, cut through the silence. At last his head lifted, revealing bloodshot, guarded eyes, the eyes of a man deprived of sleep for far too long. "Who are you?" he croaked, his voice rusty from disuse. "Sarah Miller." attorney with Morrison and Klein. Your counsel. He scoffed, a dry, mirthless sound. Stuck with his more like it. His gaze drifted back to his imaginary point on the floor. Don't waste your time, counselor. I am guilty. Just wrap it up. Sarah positioned a chair and sat, her briefcase settling with a soft thud beside her. The chill of the concrete floor seeped through her pumps. I can't do that, Mr. Johnson. Not until I understand your perspective. He offered no reply. Sarah waited, the silence amplifying the city's distant thrum. She took note of details, the faded tattoo of a soaring eagle on his forearm, the minute scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the unconscious rhythm of his thumb tracing the cup's rim. Finally, a whisper escaped him. There's no story, just a failure who can't get it right. Everyone possesses a narrative, Mr. Johnson, Sarah responded softly. And I believe yours warrants telling. He shook his head, a gesture of profound resignation. Doesn't matter. Nobody cares. I do, Sarah stated, her voice imbued with conviction. And I'm prepared to fight for you. But that requires your cooperation. You have to tell me what transpired. Silence descended once more, his gaze unwavering. Sarah sensed the formidable wall he'd erected around himself, a bulwark built of anguish and distrust. Penetrating it would be a formidable undertaking, one she was prepared to meet head-on. The report indicates you were discovered asleep in an alley, that you resisted. She paused, allowing the facts to register. Correct. He shifted uneasily, a fleeting expression, anger, humiliation, crossing his features. They wouldn't leave me be, he muttered, just looking to harass me. Why that alley, Mr. Johnson? Hesitation tightened his jaw. None of your concern. Sarah stifled a sigh. This would prove tougher than anticipated. It becomes my concern when it leads to criminal charges. She kept her voice level, devoid of accusation. Listen, I appreciate your reluctance, but I need to grasp the full picture to be of assistance. Are you injured? Do you have shelter? Are you in need of food? At last, he met her gaze, his eyes reflecting suspicion mingled with a fragile flicker, something akin to nascent hope struggling against the darkness. A visible swallow punctuated the air near his gaunt neck. Hungry, he conceded, the word barely audible. Sarah rose. I'll be back shortly. Stepping out of the holding cell, a surge of determination solidified her resolve. This transcended the typical case. This was a man in dire need, and she was committed to providing him every possible aid. Whispers of a past life. Sarah leaned in, the chair's metal legs scraping a curt protest against the worn linoleum. The interrogation room, a study in bleak efficiency, reeked of disinfectant and stale coffee. Across from her, Samuel was a portrait of defeat, slumped in his seat, eyes locked on some invisible horror beyond the peeling wall. Hours she'd spent trying to unravel the threads that led to his explosion. Samuel, she began, her voice barely audible above the fluorescent hum. Tell me about the life you had before. No response. The silence pressed down, a tangible weight. Patience, etched into her very being through years of experience, held her steady. A tick pulsed in his jaw. Doesn't signify, he finally rasped, his voice like pebbles grinding in a dry gulch. That person's gone. But he was still you, wasn't he? Who was he? His eyes shuttered closed, and for a moment, she thought he'd remain mute. Then, a sigh, a sound laden with exhaustion, escaped him. Soldier, he breathed, the word a mere exhalation. Used to be a soldier, a damn good one. Served my country, believed. Her pen flew across the notepad, a frantic scratching against the paper. Your unit, Samuel? His eyes glazed over, lost in a forgotten battlefield. 101st Airborne, Screaming Eagles, parachuted into nightmares more times than I care to remember. A dry, mirthless chuckle rattled in his chest. Thought I was bulletproof. Naive kid. She allowed the quiet to linger, giving him room to navigate the labyrinth of his memories. And after the service? What then? A grimace twisted his features, a fleeting brushstroke of agony. Married, incredible woman. Called Sarah. believe it or not. He glanced up, a ghost of a smile flickering across his lips. She was sunlight. I was just grateful to bask in her glow. Sarah felt a pang of empathy. She could almost conjure the image of the young soldier and his radiant wife, brimming with optimism. What happened, Samuel? His shoulders seemed to cave inward. She got sick, like wildfire. Cancer devoured her in months, just extinguished, like a blown candle. He ran a trembling hand through his unkempt hair. Everything worthwhile in my life died with her. The room seemed to chill, the hum of the lights intensifying to a malevolent drone. And after that, Sarah prompted softly. Then, disintegration. Drank myself blind. Lost my job. Lost my apartment. Lost everything. He paused, his voice fracturing. Tried to keep it together. Tried to be the man she deserved. But I couldn't. Just couldn't. He looked up, his gaze raw and unguarded, a plea for absolution shimmering within. It's all my doing, you understand. Every last bit. I failed her. I failed myself. Sarah closed her notebook, the silence a thick shroud between them. She couldn't mend everything, couldn't banish the pain that haunted him. But perhaps, just perhaps, she could illuminate a path back from the abyss. She could champion his cause, lend him a voice, a chance to be heard. Samuel, she said, her tone firm yet compassionate. It's not your fault. You've endured a living hell. But you're not alone now. I'm here to help. His eyes searched hers, probing, as if attempting to decipher the truth behind her words. For the first time since she'd encountered him, she detected something beyond despair lurking in his expression. A fragile ember of hope, perhaps, or simply the barest glimmer of a man prepared to lower his defenses. The judge's recognition. Samuel edged forward, the prison-issued jumpsuit a scarlet letter branded against his skin. Overhead, the courtroom's fluorescent lights buzzed, a discordant harmony mirroring the unease churning within him. He raised a hand, the oath a brittle whisper escaping his dry lips. At his side, Sarah's hand offered a steadying pressure, a beacon against the hostile gazes emanating from the elevated bench. Judge Thompson, Mr. Johnson, the judge's voice resonated, a low thrum that filled the space. You stand accused of vagrancy, resisting arrest, and disturbing the peace. Enter your plea. Samuel swallowed, the word catching in his throat. Guilty, Your Honor. The admission tasted like defeat. Sarah's fingers tightened on his arm, a silent urging to contest the charges, to explain. But the will to fight had long since deserted him. What purpose would it serve? Weariness clung to him, settling deep in his bones. Mr. Johnson, Judge Thompson pressed, leaning forward. I understand you were discovered sleeping in the park. Are you without residence? A barely perceptible shake of his head was his reply. No, sir. Regarding the resisting arrest, officers allege you resorted to violence. This was the source of his shame. It hadn't been intentional. Panic had seized him, a primal urge for survival overriding reason. I reacted out of fear, Your Honor. I never intended to injure anyone. He kept his eyes trained on the scuffed wooden floor, avoiding the judge's scrutiny. Tell me, Mr. Johnson. Judge Thompson's tone softened, acquiring an unexpected gentleness. What circumstances led you to this predicament? Samuel hesitated, his memories a field of buried explosives. I serve in the military, sir. A tick pulsed in Judge Thompson's jaw. Branch. Army, sir. Combat engineer. The words echoed hollowly, like a forgotten soldier's litany. Your deployment? Iraq, sir. 2 tours of duty. The scent of scorched earth, the phantom echoes of explosions, assailed him. Judge Thompson held his gaze for what felt like an age. Then, the question, Mr. Johnson, were you ever stationed near? Tikrit. Samuel's head jerked up. Tikrit. A wave of sickness threatened to overwhelm him. The ambush. The faces of comrades lost. Yes, sir. I was. He hadn't uttered the name of Tikrit in years. Then, a flicker. An almost imperceptible change in Judge Thompson's demeanor. A brief widening of the eyes. A subtle relaxation of the lines around his mouth. Recognition undeniable. But recognition of what? Of whom? Sensing the shift in atmosphere, Sarah's brow furrowed as she darted her gaze between Samuel and the judge. She had sensed the judge's piercing interest, the deviation from standard procedure. Something deeper was at play, just beyond her grasp. "That will suffice for now, Mr. Johnson," Judge Thompson declared, his voice reverting to its official timbre. "Ms. Miller, I require your presence in my chambers." "Alone?" Sarah nodded, her mind a whirlwind of speculation. What had just transpired? What knowledge did Judge Thompson possess? She squeezed Samuel's arm in silent reassurance, a promise to unearth the truth. As the bailiff escorted Samuel away, she followed Judge Thompson through a massive oak door, abandoning the sterile courtroom for the uncharted territory beyond. Samuel T. Johnson. The courtroom's fluorescent tubes emitted a high-pitched whine, a relentless drone that amplified the tremors in Samuel's gut. He sank further into the uncomfortable seat, the coarse fabric of the public defender's hand-me-down chafing against his skin. Days, or perhaps weeks, had bled into a single, grimy blur. Shame, an old acquaintance, clawed at him. He was a spectacle, a broken man displayed for public scrutiny. Across the aisle, the prosecutor, her gaze like chipped ice, adjusted her spectacles. The microphone amplified her voice, a sharp, penetrating sound. "Your Honor, the state calls Samuel T. Johnson to the stand." The unfamiliar cadence jolted him. Samuel T. Johnson, a name unheard for what felt like decades. The T, a forgotten relic, buried deep beneath layers of failure and self-disgust. It rang hollow, a phantom echo from a life unrecognizable. He blinked against the glare. The stenographer's fingers froze above the keys. Beside him, Sarah, the public defender, offered a brief, reassuring touch on his arm. He barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the woman on the bench. Judge Thompson. Throughout the preliminary hearings, she had been the embodiment of impartial justice, a study in stoicism. But now, her face was a landscape of disbelief. Her lips, usually pressed into a professional line, parted slightly. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering moments ago, widened, reflecting the harsh light like splintered glass. All color seeped from her complexion, leaving it ashen. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The whine of the lights seemed to intensify, becoming a suffocating wave of sound. The bailiff, a mountain of a man who had stood as still as a statue, shifted his weight, his hand twitching near his holster. Judge Thompson's knuckles gleamed white as she clutched the edge of the bench. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her gaze remained locked on Samuel. A bewildering mix of shock and something else, a recognition, perhaps, or even a profound grief. A deep shiver coursed through him, not from the cold this time, but from a primal fear. What was unfolding? This was not the script he'd anticipated. Indifference, maybe a fleeting flicker of pity before the gavel fell. That was the expectation. Not this. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the frantic drumming of Samuel's pulse. A lone fly buzzed against the window pane, its drone magnified in the stillness. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Then, with a suddenness that made everyone jump, Judge Thompson was on her feet. Her movement was abrupt, almost clumsy, a stark contrast to her usual composed demeanor. Her chair scraped against the polished floor, the sound echoing like a pistol shot in the hushed courtroom. She stood there, swaying imperceptibly, her eyes still riveted to Samuel. Her lips moved, forming words lost to the room. Then she found her voice, a fragile whisper that somehow carried with unsettling clarity. "Bailiff," she managed, her voice trembling. "Recess. This court is in recess. Now." The bailiff, jolted from his daze, barked an order. Everyone remained seated, but the judge ignored him. She pivoted sharply and walked with stiff, unnatural strides towards the back chambers. The door slammed shut behind her, the sound reverberating through the stunned quiet. Samuel remained rooted to his seat, his mind reeling. He stared at the closed door, his heart hammering against his ribs. What just transpired? What did she know? What meaning did Samuel T. Johnson hold for her? He couldn't grasp it. All he knew was that something fundamental had shifted, something with the potential to change everything, or perhaps to shatter it completely. A hero's welcome. The silence in the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. Samuel kept his gaze fixed on the worn wood of the defense table, the grain a swirling vortex of browns and blacks that mirrored the turmoil in his gut. He was a spectacle, a broken man displayed for the morbid curiosity of strangers. Guilt gnawed at him, a constant, relentless ache. He was a disgrace to the uniform, to the memory of those he'd served with. Sarah squeezed his hand, her touch a small spark of warmth in the icy dread that had settled over him. He didn't look up. He couldn't. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the hushed room. "Mr. Johnson," he began, his voice resonating with an authority that brooked no argument. "Before we proceed, there's something I believe the court should acknowledge." Samuel finally risked a glance. The judge wasn't looking at him. He was looking at the gallery, at the lawyers, at the court officers. His expression was grave, almost reverential. "Mr. Bailiff," Judge Thompson said, his voice firm, "please instruct everyone in the courtroom to rise." A ripple of confusion spread through the room. Murmurs broke out, hushed and uncertain. Sarah's grip tightened on Samuel's hand. He saw the question in her eyes, mirroring his own bewilderment. The bailiff, a burly man with a stern face, hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "All rise," he boomed, his voice echoing through the room. Slowly, reluctantly, people began to stand. Lawyers straightened their ties, jurors shifted in their seats, spectators craned their necks, whispering amongst themselves. Samuel remained seated, rooted to the spot by a mixture of confusion and shame. Sarah gently nudged him. "Samuel," she murmured, "you should stand." He shook his head, a silent protest. He didn't deserve this. He deserved to be forgotten, to fade into the anonymity of the streets. Judge Thompson's voice cut through the remaining murmurs. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his gaze finally settling on Samuel, "please stand. This is not about you. It's about honoring the sacrifice you made for this country." The words hit him like a physical blow. Sacrifice. Honor. They were foreign concepts, relics of a past he had tried so hard to bury. But the judge's tone, the unwavering gaze of the bailiff, the expectant silence of the courtroom, it was a weight he couldn't ignore. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, Samuel pushed himself to his feet. His joints protested with a chorus of pops and creaks. He stood awkwardly, his head bowed, his eyes fixed on the floor. A hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Thompson nodded, a flicker of something that might have been gratitude in his eyes. "Samuel T. Johnson," he announced, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as a sergeant with the 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, during combat operations in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, on October 16, 2007. He paused, taking a deep breath. The courtroom was utterly silent, every eye fixed on Samuel. Sergeant Johnson distinguished himself by extraordinary heroism when his patrol was ambushed by a numerically superior enemy force. Despite being severely wounded in the initial attack, Sergeant Johnson single-handedly held off the enemy advance, allowing his comrades to regroup and evacuate wounded personnel. He repeatedly exposed himself to heavy fire, using his own body as a shield to protect his fellow soldiers. When his ammunition was exhausted, he engaged the enemy in hand-to-hand combat, killing several insurgents before being overwhelmed. His selfless actions and unwavering courage were directly responsible for saving the lives of multiple soldiers and preventing the enemy from overrunning the patrol. For his extraordinary heroism and selfless service, Sergeant Johnson was awarded the Medal of Honor. The judge paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. This court recognizes and honors Sergeant Johnson's service and sacrifice. the weight of honor. The courtroom felt airless, thick with unspoken anxieties. Samuel remained slumped, the rough tweed of the ill-fitting suit itching like a swarm of ants. He shied away from Sarah's bright, expectant expression, his gaze fixed on the scuffed surface of the table before him. The burden of valor, once his armor, now felt like a lead weight pulling him under. He was no longer a hero. He was merely a problem. Sarah broke the silence, her voice a confident beacon. "Your Honor, we submit for consideration the defendant's service record." She presented a substantial file to the clerk, who, in turn, delivered it to Judge Thompson. The judge, a keen observer with perceptive eyes, perched her glasses on her nose and began to peruse the documents. A ripple of reaction spread through the chamber. The gallery's subdued hum evaporated beneath the intensity of Judge Thompson's concentrated gaze. "Sergeant Samuel T. Johnson," Sarah continued, "distinguished himself in service to the United States Army, earning a Silver Star for extraordinary bravery during Operation Anaconda." Samuel recoiled inwardly. The memory, usually a muted echo, erupted into sharp, stinging clarity. The white-out conditions, the biting reek of cordite, the cries of the wounded. He squeezed his eyelids shut, fighting the phantom sensations. Sarah's tone was softer now, yet unwavering. "We also have statements from his commanding officer, Captain Michael Davies, and several squad members, each a testament to Sergeant Johnson's unwavering courage and devotion to his comrades." She offered the letters, each one a tribute to a man Samuel no longer recognized in himself. Words like altruistic, leader, and gallant reverberated in his mind, mocking his present degradation. He had failed those memories, those men. The baker, Mr. Olson, shifted uneasily. This wasn't the outcome he envisioned. He simply wanted the transient gone, the one who frightened away his patrons and sought refuge in his doorway. This revelation, this complicated things. Judge Thompson looked up, her face unreadable as a stone mask. "Mr. Olson," she addressed him, her voice resonant with authority. "Do you wish to proceed with the prosecution of Mr. Johnson?" A protracted quiet descended, broken only by the faint electrical drone of the overhead lights. Mr. Olson squirmed, a blush creeping up his neck. He flickered a glance towards Samuel, an emotion bordering on remorse flickering in his gaze. "No, Your Honor," he mumbled, the words barely audible. I dropped the charges." A collective intake of breath filled the room. Sarah pivoted towards Samuel, a look of triumph illuminating her face. He couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. Gratitude fought a losing battle against self-loathing. He didn't deserve such grace. Judge Thompson inclined her head, a subtle smile gracing her lips. "The charges of vagrancy, resisting arrest, and disturbing the peace are hereby dismissed. Mr. Johnson, you are free to leave." But Samuel remained rooted to the spot. He was still imprisoned, not by legal constraints, but by the invisible shackles of his past. "Mr. Johnson," Judge Thompson resumed, her tone gentle yet resolute, "this court acknowledges your service to our nation. We are deeply grateful." She paused thoughtfully. "I understand that reintegration into civilian society can present difficulties. I would like to offer assistance in connecting you with support systems available to veterans in need. Housing, counseling, vocational training, whatever assistance you may require." Finally, he raised his head, his gaze connecting with hers. He saw understanding there, not condemnation, but profound human compassion. A faint ember of hope ignited within him, a fragile flicker in the enveloping gloom. As he exited the courtroom, a small throng had formed outside. Some offered words of encouragement, others extended their hands in gratitude. One woman furtively pressed a $20 bill into his palm. He felt exposed, almost overwhelmed by the sudden surge of goodwill. He yearned to vanish, to retreat into the faceless anonymity of the streets. But he knew he could not any longer. The weight of honor persisted, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was becoming bearable, a burden he could shoulder. A new beginning. The gavel's thud resonated, chasing away the shadows in Samuel's heart. Case dismissed. The pronouncement hung, a fragile promise blooming into reality. A wave of astonishment washed over the courtroom before erupting into a cacophony of celebration. People rose, applauding, exclaiming, some even whistling their approval. Disoriented, Samuel blinked. He hadn't dared anticipate such a response after the years of despair that had dogged him. Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "They believe in you, Samuel," she murmured, her voice thick. "They really do." He met her gaze, then surveyed the crowd, a mosaic of faces united in empathy. Mrs. Rodriguez, from the soup kitchen, clutched her chest, her lips moving in silent benediction. A cadre of veterans, their faces bearing the map of experience, offered terse, supportive salutes. Even a pair of the younger officers who had been present at his arrest stood rigidly near the exit, their expressions indecipherable. A tentative smile, like a shy sunrise, played at the corners of Samuel's mouth. It felt alien, yet profoundly welcome. Hope had been a forgotten luxury, crushed beneath the weight of his transgressions. But now, a spark kindled by shared humanity flickered to life. As the applause sustained its fervor, Sarah guided him through the outpouring of goodwill. Reaching hands, calls of his name, words of encouragement, the intensity threatened to overwhelm him. He gripped Sarah's hand, anchoring himself to her steady presence. Stepping outside the courthouse, the cool autumnal air soothed his skin. The sun, once veiled by cloud cover, burst forth, lavishing the street with honeyed light. It was a benediction, a herald of brighter prospects. "All right," Sarah declared, her tone practical. "We have work to do." Securing suitable housing was the immediate priority. The church had rallied, providing a temporary room at a nearby boarding house. Simple, yet secure, it was a universe away from the park bench that had been his refuge. The room held a basic cot, a modest dresser, and a single window overlooking a tranquil lane. It felt palatial. That evening, after a revitalizing shower and donning donated, yet pristine, clothes, Samuel perched on the bed, gazing out the window. Streetlights cast elongated silhouettes, painting the scene in muted hues. He considered his past, the errors etched into his memory, the vanished opportunities. Guilt gnawed, a familiar ache deep within. But tonight, that remorse was leavened with something new, resolve. He couldn't undo the past, but he could sculpt the future. He owed it to Sarah, to the community that had embraced him, and above all, to himself, to make a sincere attempt. The following morning, Sarah arrived wielding a notepad and a plan of action. First order of business, she announced, identification. She detailed the process of acquiring replacement documentation. Then they would navigate the Veterans Affairs system. She had already initiated contact, scheduling an appointment with a veterans advocate. The process loomed, a bureaucratic maze. Yet, with Sarah as his guide, her intellect and drive unflagging, Samuel discovered a stirring of hope. He completed forms, answered queries, and waited patiently in endless queues. Each small triumph, each incremental gain, felt like a monumental leap forward. Days blurred into weeks. Sarah assisted him in his job search, refining his resume to spotlight his skills. He began attending gatherings at the Veterans Center, finding strength in shared experiences. Slowly, deliberately, Samuel began to reconstruct his life, piece by piece. The path ahead remained long and challenging, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he wasn't treading it solo.